the dehumanizing of them, because at a certain point, while you're kneeling on this man's neck and he's saying he can't breathe and he hurts, you're not thinking to yourself, this is a human being.
This is The Deep Dive with Adam Roa.
Yo, what is up, deep divers? Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Deep Dive podcast. It's just you and me today. I have been really bothered, really upset by the killings of Ahmaud Arbery and another killing of George Floyd. And if you're not aware of those situations, they were two black men, one of whom was tracked down by some vigilantes with guns, basically some white men that shot him in the street and killed him. And there is a video going around right now of George Floyd, who was a man who was being arrested for using a counterfeit bill, which he may not have even known is counterfeit, but he used a counterfeit bill. They were arresting him. The video shows him on the ground, handcuffed with 4 police officers, one of whom is kneeling on his neck while he is asking them and begging them that he can't breathe and that he hurts, and he ended up being killed by these police officers. And it's been really difficult to see, and so important to see, because there is a quote by Will Smith that I feel like is so relevant, which is, racism is not getting worse, it's just getting filmed. And that, for every video that you are seeing of racism, for every black man that you see on camera being killed by white cops or vigilantes or whoever, there are so many that go unfilmed. There are so many that have gone unfilmed for so long at this point that it is embarrassing. I think as human beings, we should feel embarrassed by the fact that this is still happening. We get to figure out a solution to this. And I went on an Instagram live with my friend Preston Smiles, and we did one of these, or two of these actually, when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and we just did another one about an hour ago, not even probably. I'm charged up from it, and to talk about George Floyd being killed. And Preston is a black man, and so it's very valuable for me as someone who, I'm half white, I'm half Filipino. I grew up in a family with my aunts and uncles. There is Hispanic, there is Korean, there is black. There are so many different cultures that I grew up in and got to experience. And for the most part, people view me as a white man. I experience white privilege. I experience being pulled over by the police and not needing to worry if I'm going to be shot for the color of my skin. There's definitely a privilege that I get to experience. And the conversation with Preston is so valuable for me as someone to understand more of his experience and what he might be going through, and to contribute my voice to the conversation as an influencer, as a thought leader, as someone that people listen to. What is my voice? What do I have to say about it? What are my thoughts about this? And it was interesting because in that conversation, so we're speaking about it, we agree on the issues, we're having a discussion about institutionalized racism, we're having a discussion about what what so many people don't understand about white privilege, what people don't understand about growing up in an environment where, because of the education that you get, I said this on the Instagram Live, but imagine you grow up in a school, because of your socioeconomic area, you grow up in a school that has outdated books that are 10 years old, that doesn't have computers. And so you don't ever learn how to use a computer. When you get out into the job environment, when you go looking for a job, going off of an outdated education and a lack of technical know-how on a computer, where most jobs are done using computers now, what sort of jobs do you think that you'll get hired for? And so then it continues this generational cycle of, from the very get-go, from the very beginning, there's a handicap. And that is institutionalized racism. That is a systemic issue that we get to look at. Now, here's something that happened. I was asking questions around this and wanting to get Preston's perspective on how much of it is socioeconomic versus the color of the skin. How much of this is exaggerated rhetoric and propaganda, right? Because for every video, there's so much racism out there. And I believe, and because I've seen them, there's also these videos that are being cut up in ways that make it look like racism, where there's more to the story. And so people aren't knowing what to believe. And so my perspective has always been, let's be balanced and try and take in everyone's perspective. Let's try and navigate this as we understand your truth and you understand my truth, and recognize that no one's changed their mind because they got yelled at more loudly. Right? If you've been in an argument with anyone, if you got called offensive names, does that mean you're more likely to change your mind? You're like, oh, you just called me a dumbass. That's a great point. Let me change my opinion now because I respect you for calling me a dumbass. Like, I think that there are healthy ways to navigate things. And I'll have you know, as someone who was a wrestler in high school, and someone who trained mixed martial arts in college, I don't have a problem with conflict. I don't have a problem with physical confrontation. That is, I think there can be a time and a place for an act of violence, in the sense of, if someone was attacking my family or even my dog, like I would physically step in 100%. So know that I walk both those lines. I speak about being even keeled. I speak about let's have a balanced approach to the conversation. And if I need to throw hands, if I need to get physical, that will happen. So again, those are polarities of a situation, and I generally am somewhere in the middle of that. And so during this conversation, one of the comments that came in to the Instagram Live was, most of the problem is from rich white men who are all usually terrible people. And I said, I want to address that comment, because that comment in my mind is the same issue that's underlying the racism. It's the same issue. If you can point to a whole group of people and say that group of people is usually a terrible person, those are terrible people, that is the behavior that is racism. So you might point it at rich white people and say rich white people are usually terrible people, but that's the same thing as people pointing to poor black people and saying they're terrible people. And I understand that we don't have a crisis of rich white people being murdered in the street by cops. And so the actual results of that are not the same. I understand that. I acknowledge that. And if we can't spot what is at the root of that behavior issue, if we can't see underneath that, then I feel like we are not actually resolving the issue. And at a certain point, it may no longer be pointed at African-American men and women. It may not be that. But that would then get turned and pointed at Mexicans or at Muslims or whatever, which we see. We see that happen as well. Why is that happening? Because the underlying root issue there is labeling people and giving them a label that dehumanizes them, that says they are worse, they are less than. And that is the what leads to hate crimes. That is what leads to racist actions. That labeling of people as being less than is the belief system that gets to stop. And so it was interesting because I called out that behavior, and I stand by it. I still will call out that behavior. And by the way, from what I saw in the profile pic, it wasn't even a black woman. This was a white woman that said this. And when I called out that behavior, that triggered a number of people in the comments who were very upset. And those things started to come in like, Adam, your feelings don't matter. Like Adam, literally like Adam is stupid, basically, or that the labeling is not more important than murder. And here's my thing. And Preston brought up a great point during this conversation, which was, how do you, we hold space in the conscious community. We hold space for people's experience. Meaning, as someone in the work who has coached people, if someone is working through a traumatic experience, they may say things or things may come up out of an emotional space that we get to not take personally. We get to say, okay, I'm not taking that personally. I'm holding space for you to have your experience because your experience is valid. And this is very, very important. If someone is incredibly angry and they have been wrong, whatever, even if they're just angry and they haven't been wronged, but if they have that experience, it's very important to let them know that that experience is worthy of being felt. It's important for that emotion to be felt. And my belief is it is important for it to be felt in a way that does not cause harm to other people or this planet. If you are angry, be angry. But if that anger is dehumanizing someone else, especially when it comes to this conversation around racism, the moment you dehumanize someone else, you have now taken on the behavior that you are working to fight against. The dehumanizing of George Floyd is what allowed that white police officer to kneel on his neck until he died. Or the police officer to choke out Eric Garner. Or for those men to shoot Ahmaud Arbery in the street. The dehumanizing of them, because at a certain point, while you're kneeling on this man's neck and he's saying he can't breathe and he hurts, you're not thinking to yourself, this is a human being that I'm hurting right now. You're not thinking to yourself, this is a father or a son or a friend or a lover. This is not a human being who I am preventing from breathing right now. So we can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. Einstein famously said, right? And in the spiritual communities, we talk about the level of consciousness that we have and how we get to elevate the consciousness of the planet. We get to our come from gets to be from a state of a heightened consciousness, of a new level of thinking. If we take on the dehumanization that we're rallying against and point it in another direction just across the line, now we're playing that game of dehumanizing. Now whoever wins, it's the one with the biggest guns, the biggest army. Because we're both fighting for the same thing, the dehumanization of others. And so it was interesting because I think that there is something that's very powerful for me to take away from that experience, which is that when people are in a heightened emotional state, right? We know that the brain, the prefrontal cortex loses blood flow and it goes into the amygdala and the limbic brain, and they're in this emotional state, right? And so rational thinking and rational thought and calm conversation isn't necessarily, it's not the best time to have it. And how do we create the safe space for all of that to be felt? Because it deserves to be felt. And how do we create the safe space for other opinions to be discussed? Because at the end of the day, what I believe to be 100% true, unless we just want to go to war and just fight each other until one side kills the other, what's most important is that we figure out how to communicate to a solution. How do we communicate our way to a solution? That is where my come from is. And I understand that as not being a Black man, it may be, it's not even maybe, it's much easier for me to sit and say, well, let's have a rational conversation about that. Let's have a logical conversation around that, while others are in that heightened, charged emotional state. And that's why I love Preston, because he's sitting there having a calm conversation about it, even though he's in that emotion. That's important. It's important for him to be able to be a role model for what's possible, even when you are angry, when you're pissed. And I think my job in that scenario was also let me speak my perspective, because there are people who also feel the way that I do. There are people who are not willing to take the arrows and the shots and be insulted for speaking their perspective. But for a white man and a Black man to have the conversation in this heightened emotional time and be able to exhibit that is incredibly important. Because at the end of the day, if we're not able to speak about it, if we're not able to actually discuss it, without attacking each other, without insulting each other, if we can't have that conversation, how do we ever expect to change it? How can you expect to change something if you're not willing to talk to the people that you need to change? If you want racism to end, the conversation has to be had between Black people and white people and all the other races too. But that conversation has to happen. That conversation has to happen. And so I believe everyone's feelings are valid. I believe every feeling that you've ever felt and will feel is valid and deserves to be felt. I think it's important for you to find spaces and places online, in person, on the phone, wherever, where you can feel those. When I get angry and I start punching things, I want to punch pillows. I want to scream into pillows. And I've been to marches. I've been to marches for various different things. I've put out poetry about various different topics and issues, from racism to the Dakota Access Pipeline to whatever. We get to feel what we're feeling. And we get to explore healthy ways for us to find a solution. And here's the thing, I could be wrong. Like, maybe what is needed is a giant violent revolution. Maybe that's actually what's needed, is rioting across the country and through the streets. Maybe that's what is needed. Maybe. But I don't believe we're at that point yet. And I'm going to continue to lend my voice to the situation in a way that says, yo, we have a problem. We have institutionalized systemic racism. We have an issue on this planet that gets to be looked at and resolved. Because of who I am as a person, I think that it's valuable for us to be engaged in that conversation where everyone's feelings are valid and everyone gets to be heard, and we work towards finding a solution to help the people most affected by this. I am not saying that because I have feelings about it, that I'm more affected by it than a black man on this planet. Not at all. But I am saying that if I don't feel safe to be in the conversation, then I can't be a part of the solution. It's important for us to come together on something as important as this. It is too important. There are too many lives at stake. There is too much that we could be doing together that is not possible until we resolve this, and it is a big deal. So my encouragement to each and every one of you is to figure out and really sit with, meditate on it, journal about it, figure out what is your stance? What do you believe about this? Then let it go and research alternative opinions on it. Go and look up the opinions. Like on social media, I follow people whose opinions I don't necessarily agree with, but I want to understand what they're saying and why they're saying it. And so I think that it is valuable for us to do that and let that actually take it in, actually let it settle and hear it, and then decide, okay, has that changed my opinion? Are there nuances to my opinion that I can now get more specific about or shift? Okay, great. Now, who can I talk to about this that could challenge my beliefs or bring a different perspective that I may not have brought before? That's how we continue to move forward together. That's how we continue to move forward together. And we all deserve that. And the Black community definitely deserves that. So I want to thank you for being a part of the solution. I want to thank you for being a part of the conversation. And sending love to each and every one of you that has been, at any point in time, deeply, deeply affected by racism. And I want to send love out to the families of Ahmaud Arbery and Eric Garner and George Floyd. I want to send love out. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. I want to remind you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Please share this out with anyone and everyone that you feel like gets to examine their beliefs and be a part of the conversation.